The first thing I want you to know is that I don't believe in signs. I'm a structural engineer. I spend my days calculating load tolerances, stress thresholds, shear forces, the physics of things holding together or falling apart. There's no room in that work for coincidence or fate, or the universe nudging you in the right direction. Things fail because of compressive overload or material fatigue or flawed design. They hold because someone did the math correctly. That's all. So, when I walked into my house that Tuesday evening in November and found a woman curled up in my bed like she'd always belonged there, I didn't think, "This means something." I thought, "I need to call the police." And then, she looked up at me with those gray eyes I hadn't seen in 4 years, and she said, "Will you help me?" Her name was Nora Callahan. She was 29 years old. She was my ex-wife's younger sister, and she was wearing a coat that was still damp from the rain, shoes that were coming apart at the seams, and the expression of someone who had run out of places to go. Let me back up. My name is Daniel Marsh, and 2 years before Nora showed up in my bed, I signed a divorce decree in a county courthouse on a Wednesday morning and drove home to a house that felt the same as it. Always had same walls, same floor plan, same structural integrity, except that all the warmth had been load transferred somewhere else, and the remaining structure was just standing there, technically sound, waiting. Cassandra and I had been married for 6 years. We met the way people who work too hard meet through a mutual colleague at an industry event, over bad canapes and decent wine, talking about bridge failures, because that was what I knew how to talk about. She was a litigation attorney. Sharp, precise, argument architecture the way I understood load architecture. We got along because we understood each other's work, which is not the same as understanding each other, but it took a long time to learn the difference. The divorce wasn't angry. That's the part people don't understand. There was no affair, no explosion, no single catastrophic event. It was structural fatigue, a material that looked fine from the outside but had been accumulating microfractures for years. We were too similar in the wrong ways, and too different in the ways that mattered. We both worked late. We both ate alone more nights than we didn't. We stopped asking each other questions we actually wanted answered. The paperwork took 4 months. We were civil. We split the furniture without fighting about it. The house was mine. I'd owned it before we married, a 1940s craftsman in East Portland that I'd been slowly gutting and restoring since I bought it at 31. Cassandra took the condo downtown. She remarried 18 months later, a tax attorney named Glenn who golfed on weekends and owned 3 suits that all looked like the same suit. I knew this because I still saw Cassandra at family events. Her parents had known my parents. Our social circles overlapped at the edges, and because people told me things I didn't ask to know. The house suited me. I was in the middle of replacing the subfloor in the 2nd bedroom when we divorced, and I finished that project alone over 2 weekends in January, kneeling on particle board with a pry bar, peeling back layers. There's something about taking a house down to its bones. Every previous owner leaves evidence. I found newspapers from 1962 under the original hardwood. I found a child's drawing, faded to near invisible, tucked under a window frame. I found evidence of a pipe repair done badly in the 90s that nobody had ever corrected, just patched over and painted and ignored. I knew how to fix things. What I didn't know how to fix was the part of me that ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the table alone felt like a statement about my life I wasn't ready to make. Nora. I'd met her 3 times during my marriage to Cassandra. The wedding. Obviously, she was a bridesmaid, 22 years old. The kind of nervous energy that filled a room differently than Cassandra's controlled precision. Then, a Thanksgiving, 4 years in, when she came home from wherever she'd been living, Seattle, I think, and sat at the far end of the table and argued with Cassandra's mother about something I didn't catch, and then laughed. Suddenly, this unguarded sound that made everyone else in the room look up. And once, briefly, at a birthday party for Cassandra's father, where Nora arrived late in work clothes and looked like she'd been crying but told everyone she was fine and I believed her the way you believe people who clearly aren't fine but have decided they don't want to talk about it. What I knew about Nora Callahan: she was 4 years younger than Cassandra. They were close in the way sisters are close when they're also fundamentally different. She'd had some kind of falling out with Cassandra's mother that neither of them explained to me. She worked in something adjacent to social services or community organizing. I was always slightly unclear on the details, and she'd been in a relationship for several years with a man named Marcus. That was the extent of it. She was my ex-wife's sister. She was someone I'd been in the same rooms with a handful of times. She was not someone who should have been in my bed. Pay attention to this part, because I missed it at the time. The first time I ever had a real conversation with Nora Callahan was at Cassandra's and my wedding reception. It was 10:30 at night. Most of the older relatives had gone. The band was playing something undemanding, and I'd stepped out onto the venue's back terrace to get 2 minutes of quiet. Nora was already out there, sitting on a stone ledge with her bridesmaid shoes off and her feet on the cool flagstone. "You escaped too?" she said. "Temporarily." I leaned against the railing. "You okay?" "I'm great. This is a great party." She didn't sound like she was being sarcastic, exactly. She sounded like she was reminding herself, "Cass looks amazing." "She does." There was a pause. Inside, someone laughed at something, the sound muffled by the glass doors. "Can I ask you something?" Nora said. "Sure. Do you know her? Like, actually know her?" She looked at me when she said it, not unkindly, but with the directness of someone who'd decided not to waste the evening on small talk. I didn't know what to say to that. It was my wedding night. "I think so," I said. "That's the plan, anyway." Nora nodded slowly, like she was turning something over in her mind, and then she smiled a different smile from the one she'd been wearing inside, something smaller and more honest, and said, "Yeah. Okay. I hope so." I didn't understand what she was telling me. I thought it was the odd thing a younger sister says on a wedding night. Complicated feelings about her sister's new life. Maybe a little wine. Nothing more. I understand it now. The second bedroom in my house was completed by spring. I started on the kitchen in March, new cabinetry, updated plumbing, a proper range hood to replace the decorative catastrophe the previous owners had installed. I work long days at the firm. Stress analysis on infrastructure projects, mostly bridges and parking structures, occasionally larger commercial builds. My boss, Frank Meyer, is 63 years old and has the communication style of a man who considers full sentences a luxury. He'd given me a project lead on the Morrison Bridge seismic retrofit, the kind of work that meant 18-hour days for 3-month stretches, and the kind of exhaustion that makes silence feel like a reward rather than a punishment. I had a neighbor named Vince who was retired and grew heirloom tomatoes and occasionally left bags of them on my porch without comment. I had a gym membership I used 4 mornings a week with the dedication of a man who needed something to be disciplined about. I had a colleague named Priya who brought her lunch in the same set of glass containers every day and who talked to me like I was a normal person and not someone whose marriage had recently dissolved, which I appreciated more than I told her. I did not have a social life in any meaningful sense. I went to work. I came home. I restored things. On Saturday evenings, I sometimes watched something on my laptop at the kitchen table while eating something I'd cooked but probably should have put more effort into. On Sunday mornings, I went to the farmer's market 2 miles away on foot and came back with things I intended to cook and sometimes did. On Tuesday evening in November, I came home from a site visit to find the front door unlocked, which I noticed because I always locked it, and because the lock itself was slightly sticky from the autumn humidity and I'd been meaning to fix it. I went in, put my bag down, went to my bedroom to change out of my field clothes, and there she was. Nora was curled on top of the covers on the right side of the bed, my ex-wife's side, which I had never consciously chosen to leave empty but apparently had in a gray wool coat that was darker at the shoulders from rain. Her knees pulled up, her shoes still on. Asleep or near asleep, her face turned toward the wall. I stood in the doorway for a moment that was longer than I want to admit. Then she heard me. She turned over. She looked at me with those gray eyes and she said, "Will you help me?" Her voice was steady. Whatever she'd been through to get here, and I had no idea yet what that was, her voice had not broken. She looked like someone who had made a calculation and arrived at the only available option. "Nora," I said, "how did you get into my house?" She held up a key on a thin silver ring. "Cass had a spare. She doesn't know I have it. She gave it to your mother-in-law years ago. I took it when I left their house tonight. Why did you leave their house?" She sat up. She was still in the coat. The left sleeve of it had a tear I hadn't noticed at first, near the elbow, small but clean, like it had caught on something. "Can I tell you the long version?" she said. I pulled the bedroom chair out from the corner where I'd been using it as a temporary storage surface, cleared it, and sat down. "Tell me the long version," I said. The long version started 8 months earlier, though I wouldn't learn some of it until later. What Nora told me that night. She and Marcus had broken up in February, not mutually, not cleanly. Marcus had been systematically moving their shared savings into a separate account for 6 weeks before he told her. The apartment was in his name. She'd had 30 days to find somewhere else. She was working for a non-profit that paid a salary I won't pretend wasn't too low for what the job required, and between that and losing her apartment, she'd bounced through a series of suboptimal arrangements, a friend's couch, a sublet that fell through, 3 weeks in an extended stay motel that ate through her emergency savings faster than she'd calculated. She'd ended up at her parents' house, Cassandra's parents' house, in October. Their father had been warm about it. Their mother had been less warm. Their mother had always been less warm with Nora in particular, and I filed that away as a thing I understood the shape of without knowing the specific reasons. She told me tonight, Nora said, that I needed to have a plan by the end of the month. She had a specific phrase for it. She said I needed to stop treating the house like a she paused, something flickering across her face like a recovery room. The way her voice went flat on that last phrase told me it was a quote, precisely reproduced. "I left," Nora said. "I drove for a while. I sat in a parking lot for an hour. I thought about calling Cass, but Cass is dealing with her own things, and also she stopped. I ended up here. I don't know. I knew the address. I've driven past it. I don't know why." She looked at the floor. One of her shoes had a broken buckle on the strap, a metal clasp that hung loose. "I should probably go," she said. "Where would you go?" She didn't answer that, which was its own answer. I thought about what I had. A 3-bedroom house with 2 working guest bedrooms and a kitchen that was functional, if not finished. I thought about what she had, which was apparently a car, a key she'd borrowed without asking, and a mother who had used the phrase recovery room like it was a verdict. "The 2nd bedroom is made up," I said. "There are clean towels in the hall closet. I'll make something to eat if you're hungry. You can tell me the rest of the long version tomorrow." She looked at me, like she was checking whether I meant it, like she'd been offered things that were conditional in ways she hadn't discovered yet and was trying to read the fine print. "I'm not doing this because of Cass," I said. "She's not going to know unless you tell her, and I'm not going to bring it up again unless you want to talk about it." I didn't know, then, why I was so certain about that last part. I just was. Nora nodded. She stood. She looked, close up and in real light, exhausted in a specific way that had nothing to do with missing sleep. "Thank you, Daniel," she said. I went to the kitchen and made eggs and toast, the only thing I had the ingredients and the energy for at 9:30 on a Tuesday in November. She ate all of it. She didn't try to make conversation, and neither did I. She was going to stay a week. That was the understanding, or the closest thing to an understanding we established. A week, long enough to arrange something else. 3 days in, I realized I had not once found her presence disruptive. She got up early, earlier than me, which I hadn't expected, and she was quiet about it, and when I came downstairs at 6, she'd already made coffee and left a mug near the machine with the handle turned toward the shelf so I could grab it one-handed. She didn't ask me anything about Cassandra. She didn't talk much at all in the mornings, which was fine, because neither did I. She worked from the second bedroom with the door open. I could hear occasional phone calls, her voice low and even, the specific register of someone who spent their days talking people through difficult situations. She worked for an organization that did housing advocacy, I learned, helping people navigate eviction proceedings, connecting them with emergency resources, arguing with landlords on behalf of people who needed someone to argue on their behalf. "You're good at that," I said one evening, having heard the tail end of a call through the open door. "At which part?" she said. "At staying calm when you're talking to someone who isn't." She thought about it. "I learned it from working with people in crisis. The calmer you are, the more space they have to calm down too. It's less about saying the right thing and more about not giving panic anything to bounce off of." I thought about load distribution, how you design a structure so that stress spreads across multiple members rather than concentrating at one point, how the failure mode changes when you change the geometry. I didn't say that. It would have required more explanation than the moment needed. The week became 2 weeks. Neither of us announced the extension. It just happened the way things happen when nobody actively terminates them. She started cooking on the nights I worked late, which I didn't ask for and which I should have told her wasn't necessary, except that I came home to a kitchen that smelled like something real and found a plate in the warming drawer, and it was the first time since the divorce that someone had thought about whether I'd eaten. I noticed, and told myself I wasn't noticing. The broken buckle on her shoe, she'd fixed it herself with a small tool she carried in her purse, some kind of awl, stitching the strap back to the clasp with a thin cord. I watched her do it at the kitchen table one morning without knowing I was watching until she looked up and caught me. "Did you make that?" I said, meaning the repair. "The tool?" "No, I found it at a market. I fix things when they break if it's cheaper than replacing them. It's a habit." "Good habit," I said. She turned back to the shoe. "You'd think so." In the 3rd week, Cassandra called. Not about Nora. I found out later that Cassandra didn't know Nora had left her parents' house for another 10 days, because their mother hadn't told her, and the reasons for that are its own separate story. Cassandra called because there was a situation with Cassandra's parents' estate planning. Her father's health had been declining, and she needed my signature on a document transferring a property interest that had somehow gotten tangled in our divorce settlement, which had been otherwise clean. I handled it by mail. But I told Cassandra I hoped things were okay with her family, because I meant it. Her father was a decent man who'd been unfailingly kind to me, even when things with Cassandra and I were visibly strained, and she said, "Things are complicated. You know how my mother gets." I said I did. There was a pause, the kind that has weight to it. "Are you okay?" Cassandra said. "You sound, I don't know, different." "I'm fine," I said, "working on the house. Still, it's a lot of house." She made a small sound that was almost a laugh and might have been. "Yes," she said, "it is." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a moment. Nora came through to refill her coffee. She didn't look at me. She didn't ask. She poured her coffee and went back to the second bedroom, and I thought about structural systems, about how a building can distribute weight so that no single element carries more than it was designed to hold, and I thought about how long I'd been carrying things because I designed the whole system around no one else helping. This was the first time I thought that. I filed it away without knowing where to put it. The 4th week, she found the binders. I keep project documentation in a set of gray 3-ring binders on the shelf in the hallway that leads to the garage site reports, load calculations, correspondence on ongoing jobs, standard engineering practice, paper backup for everything digital. What I also keep in that hallway, on the lower shelf, less organized, are the house files, permits, contractor receipts, the original architectural drawings from when the house was built in 1943, and a set of photographs I'd taken room by room when I bought it, before I started the restoration. Nora was looking at the photographs when I got home that Thursday. She'd pulled the whole folder, sat on the hallway floor with her back against the wall and her legs stretched out, going through them one by one. She didn't hear me come in, or she heard me and didn't look up immediately, which told me she was genuinely absorbed. "These are before," she said when she finally looked up. "Not a question. Before I bought it, yeah." She turned another photograph. The kitchen in its original state, peeling linoleum, cabinets painted over 6 times in 6 different shades of beige, a fluorescent fixture hanging from bare wire. It looked like someone gave up. A lot of previous owners gave up. In sequence, I sat on the floor next to her, not beside. Exactly, more at a perpendicular angle, the way you sit when you're looking at something together and you both need sight lines. The bones were good, though. Foundation was solid. The people who built it knew what they were doing. She held up a photograph of the second bedroom before I'd started on it. Water stain on the ceiling, damaged plaster, the subfloor bowing visibly near the window. This one scared me. "That one scared me too," I said. But it was the subfloor. Once I pulled the boards up, the joists were fine. The problem was at the surface. Nora looked at the photograph for a moment longer. Then she put it with the others, neatly, and handed me back the folder. "That must be a good feeling," she said, "to take something that looks too far gone and find out it isn't." "It is," I said. I didn't say anything else, neither did she. After a moment she got up, and I stayed on the floor with the folder in my lap, and I was thinking about that phrase, "too far gone," and how she said it, and what I suspected she was not quite talking about. The thing about Nora that I was learning in slow increments: she never asked for things directly. She operated through adjacency. She'd mention something in passing, and wait to see what you did with it. Not manipulative. I want to be precise about that. It wasn't strategy. It was self-protection. She'd spent time around people who used her directness against her, I think, and so she'd learned to leave doors ajar and let others walk through them if they chose. I know this because I am built the same way, and I recognized it the way you recognize a structural pattern once you know what to look for. For example, she never told me directly that she was afraid to contact the Housing Advocacy Organization's board about a funding dispute that was threatening the organization's solvency. She mentioned it 3 times over 2 weeks, once in passing, once as an aside, once in the specific tone people use when they're trying to put something down. Each time I listened. On the 3rd time I said, "Have you written it out?" "What you'd say to them?" She looked at me. "No. If you write it out, the actual argument, the logic of why they're wrong and what the consequences are, it's easier to present than if you're assembling it while you're in the room. The math is already done." She blinked. "That's yes." "Okay." She wrote it out that weekend. She sent it to the board chair on Monday. I don't know what the response was, because she didn't tell me, but I know she slept better for the next 3 nights than she had been sleeping, because the quality of her footsteps in the morning was different, lighter, not the careful, deliberate tread of someone carrying something heavy. I noticed the footsteps. I did not comment on this. Cassandra called again in the 5th week. This time, she asked about the house, specifically the kitchen. Was I done with it? She'd always thought the original range hood was ugly, and she was glad I was fixing it. We talked about the house the way we'd always been able to talk about the house, neutrally and specifically, without the conversation having to be about anything else. And then she said, "Have you talked to Nora recently?" I was standing at the kitchen sink. Outside the window, the November rain had been going for 4 days without real interruption. "Why?" I said. She left Mom and Dad's a few weeks ago. No one knows where she's staying. Mom's not worried, which means Mom thinks she'll come back and be appropriately apologetic, and Dad is worried but won't say so because he doesn't want to fight with Mom about it. A pause. "I'm worried." "She's fine," I said. Silence. "Daniel." "She's safe," I said. "She's okay. That's all I can tell you." Another silence. Longer, a different kind. "Cassandra is a litigator." She knows when someone is giving her the answer to a question she didn't ask, in order to avoid the answer to the one she did. "Okay," she said finally. Her voice was very even. "Okay. Just tell her to call me when she wants to." "I will." After I hung up, I stood at the sink for a while. The rain was steady against the window. I heard Nora's door open down the hall. The sound of her coming toward the kitchen. She'd been on a call. I'd heard the low murmur of her voice through the closed door, and when she came in, I handed her a mug of coffee without turning around. She took it. She stood next to me at the window. "That was Cass," I said. Nora wrapped both hands around the mug. "I know." I didn't ask her how she knew. There was a pause. The rain moved across the window in a diagonal sheet. "She wants you to call her when you're ready," I said. Nora said, "Okay." That was all. But I felt something shift, not resolve, not decide, just shift. Like a structural system, when a load is redistributed. The geometry changing in a way that hasn't failed anything yet but has changed what the forces are doing. In the 6th week, she told me about Marcus. The real version, not the abbreviated one from the first night. She told me on a Saturday afternoon when we were both home, both separately occupied. She was at the kitchen table with a laptop and a pile of paper documents. I was on the floor of the living room, sorting through the original hardwood planks I'd been stockpiling to replace the sections that were too damaged to save. She started talking while looking at her screen, like she wasn't quite talking to me, like she was maybe practicing out loud. What had happened? Marcus had been the kind of person who offered help in ways that created debt. Every assist came with an architecture. He'd pay for things, then reference the payment. He'd solve problems, then mention the solving. He'd been doing it for so long that Nora had developed a sensitivity to it, a kind of learned reflex where she stopped asking for anything, because every ask had a price she'd find out about later. "I stopped asking for things," she said, "and he called it independence. He said I was cold. He said I didn't let him in." She turned a page without reading it, and he was right. I didn't. I'd stopped letting him in long before I knew I'd done it. I set down the plank I was holding. "He moved the money," she said, "because he knew it was ending. He'd known longer than I had. I was still trying to figure out how to fix it when he'd already decided what to take." "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm not telling you for sympathy." She said it without sharpness, just precision. "I'm telling you because I'm aware that being here is I'm aware of what it could look like. Me asking you for help. Me being here for 6 weeks. I looked at her. She was looking at her laptop, still not quite at me. "What does it look like?" I said. "Like I'm doing the same thing," she said. "Creating debt. Owing something." "You're not creating debt," I said. "You've been cooking 4 nights a week and you fixed the stuck drawer in the kitchen that I've been ignoring for 8 months. That's not the same." "No," I said, "but it tells me you're not keeping score. The people who are keeping score don't fix your drawers without announcing it." She looked at me then, just briefly. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not one. She turned back to her laptop. I went back to the hardwood planks. We stayed in the same room for another 2 hours without talking, and it was the most comfortable I'd been in a space with another person since before my marriage went quiet. The leaky pipe under the kitchen sink, I'd known about it since October, a slow drip from the coupling on the cold water supply line, the kind of thing a structural engineer finds embarrassing to ignore, and yet manages to ignore, because the drip is minor and the patch is easy, and the kitchen has 17 other things that need doing first. Nora found it in week 7. She found it because she was reaching under the sink for a sponge and her hand came out wet. I watched her crouch down and open the cabinet door and look at it without any expression I could read, and then she looked up at me. "You knew," she said. "It wasn't an accusation, more like confirmation. I've been meaning to fix it. How long?" I didn't answer. Which answered it. She got up. She went to her room. She came back with a small canvas pouch of tools, the same pouch where she kept the awl she'd used on her shoe, and she got back under the sink, and she tightened the coupling and replaced the washer with one from a collection she had in a tin container in her pouch, and when she was done, the drip had stopped. She stood up, dried her hands, and looked at me with something in her expression that wasn't judgment, which would have been easier. It was recognition. "You know what your problem is?" she said. "One of them," I said. "You fix everything that belongs to the house. You leave everything that belongs to you." I didn't have an answer to that. I'm not sure there was one. It was Owen Delacroix who said the thing that broke something open in me. Owen is the site foreman on the Morrison Bridge project. 61, 38 years in construction, the kind of man who communicates in complete sentences only when he has something specific to say. We've worked together on 3 projects. He came to the house in week 7 to discuss a subcontractor issue I couldn't resolve over the phone. Something about load plate fabrication that needed a physical look at my calculations. We went through the engineering for 2 hours at the kitchen table. When we were done, he folded his drawings and looked around the kitchen, the new cabinets, the finished countertop, the range hood that was finally working correctly. "Good work," he said, meaning the kitchen. "Getting there." He looked at the 2 coffee mugs on the counter. He had 38 years of reading situations. I watched him take in the 2 mugs. The second bedroom door with its light on, the extra jacket on the hook by the back door that was too small to be mine. He looked at me. "Daniel," he said, "I'm going to ask you something real." "Okay," I said. "You've been divorced 2 years. You haven't gone on one date, far as I know. You drink your morning coffee from a mug with a crack in it that you've had since before the divorce. You work on this house every weekend, and you call that building something." "I am building something," I said. "Sure," he said. "The question is what?" He picked up his drawings and his hard hat and let himself out. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the 2 coffee mugs. The cracked one was mine. It had come from a street market years ago, before Cassandra, before everything. I'd bought it because the blue of it was good and the crack hadn't been there yet, and by the time the crack appeared, it was the mug I reached for without thinking. The other mug was hers, white with a handle that curved slightly narrower than the standard, one of 4 from a set she'd bought when she moved in. 3 of the others were in the cabinet. This one lived on the counter next to the machine because she left it there after her morning coffee and I hadn't moved it. I thought about what Owen said the whole rest of that day and into the night, and I kept coming back to the same answer, which was that he was wrong about one thing. I wasn't pretending I was fine. I knew exactly what I'd been doing. The question I didn't have an answer for was whether I was willing to stop. She found work, permanent housing, a sublease on a studio 2 miles away, available in January. She told me on a Wednesday evening in the 8th week, sitting across the kitchen table from me with her laptop open, showing me the listing like she was presenting a report. "Good location," I said, because it was. "It's small, but the building is solid. Old brick, 1920s, they maintained it." She was watching my face while she said this. "When do you have to decide?" "End of the week." She closed the laptop. She kept her hands flat on the lid of it. "I wanted to make sure you knew that this was never going to be permanent. I want you to know I understood that." "I know you understood it," I said. A pause. "Did you?" she said. I looked at her. This was the first time in 8 weeks that either of us had said anything that opened directly onto what was actually happening in this house. We'd been talking around it with the precision of 2 people who were both aware of the shape of it and had separately decided not to be the one to name it first. "I understood it was temporary," I said carefully. "I didn't decide anything past that." She kept looking at me. Outside, the November rain had finally ended, and the air was cold and dry, and through the kitchen window I could see the neighbor Vince's tomato frames standing empty against the fence, the plants done for the season. "I'm going to take the studio," she said. "Okay," I said, "and I want you to know," she stopped, started again. "I want you to know that being here, that you letting me be here, that mattered. It wasn't a sacrifice," I said. "I know it wasn't," she said. "That's what I'm telling you." I know it wasn't. I held that for a moment. And then she said, I'm going to call Cass tomorrow. I nodded. She's going to ask questions, Nora said. About where I've been. What are you going to tell her? A long pause. Her hands were still flat on the laptop. The truth, she said. I've been staying with a friend. She said, friend, the way you say a word that is accurate but incomplete, the way you'd call a load-bearing wall a wall to someone who doesn't need to know the engineering. I understand now that this was the moment. That the thing that happened next was built on everything that had accumulated in 8 weeks. The footsteps in the morning. The drawer she fixed, without telling me. The 2 mugs on the counter. The way she said too far gone while looking at a photograph of a damaged floor. At the time I thought, she's leaving, and that's reasonable, and I should say something. What I actually said was, there's a section of hardwood in the living room near the window that I've been putting off. The grain direction is wrong for the boards I have stockpiled. I ordered a different cut last week. They're coming in before January. She looked at me. I thought. I said, if you wanted, before you moved to the studio, we could put the floor in. It was not what I meant to say. It was also exactly what I meant to say. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at the kitchen table. Then she looked back at me. Yeah, she said. Okay. She called Cassandra the next morning. I was in the garage when it happened. I could hear the conversation through the side door that I'd left open for airflow while I was cutting. I didn't try to hear it. I just couldn't avoid it entirely. The tone of it was careful at first, then looser. Then at one point there was a stretch of Nora's voice that was higher and more compressed than her usual register, which told me they'd gotten to something difficult, and then it settled again. She came to the garage door when it was done and stood there. How did it go? I said. Better than I thought. She leaned against the doorframe. She's not angry. She said she should have. She said some things. She paused. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. She said she could hear that I was. Could she? Apparently. She looked at the board I was cutting. She asked about you. I turned off the saw. What about me? I said. Just how you were. She said. Nora paused again, in the particular way of someone choosing words carefully for something that doesn't quite fit any. She said you were a good person. She said that like it was something she should have told me before, maybe. I'm not sure. I thought about Cassandra saying he sounded different on the phone 2 weeks ago. What did you tell her? I said. I told her I already knew. I looked at Nora. She was looking at the garage floor, the oil stain near the door that I'd been meaning to do something about for a year. Daniel, she said. Yeah. I'm going to say something and then I'm going to go start dinner because I'll need something to do after I say it. Okay, I said. She looked up. I didn't end up here by accident. I didn't plan it. But the key. I'd had the key for 2 years. I knew your address. When I got in my car that night, I could have gone anywhere. I went here. I let that sit. I know that she started. Don't qualify it, I said. She stopped. I know, I said. I know you didn't. And I know you know I know. A pause. That's a lot of knowing, she said. Yes, I said. It is. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she went inside to start dinner. I stood in the garage with the saw off and the board half cut, and I thought about structural systems, about how sometimes the failure mode is not too little load on a structure but too much empty space around it, and how a structure designed to hold weight becomes something different when the weight finally comes. She told me the rest of it that night. The part she'd held back from the first night version. Marcus hadn't just moved the money, he'd also called her employer, 7 months before the breakup, and told them she was unstable. He'd framed it as concern. He'd cited specific incidents that were real events, described from an angle that made them sound like symptoms. The organization's executive director had not fired her. Nora was too good at her job, and they knew it. But there had been a meeting, and a probationary structure, and a period of what was framed as increased support but functioned as surveillance, and it had taken Nora 6 months to rebuild trust to the point where she wasn't being watched for signs of the instability Marcus had described. "I didn't tell anyone," she said. "Not Cass. Not my parents. Partly because I was ashamed. Partly because I knew if I told Cass she'd do something about it, and whatever she did would become about her doing something about it." "What would you have wanted her to do?" I said. "Believe me," she said. "Just that. I wanted someone to hear it and believe me without immediately trying to fix it or fight it. I thought about the board meeting letter, about how I hadn't tried to write it for her, about how I'd just said if you write it out and let her do it herself." "I believe you," I said. She looked at me. Her hands were around the coffee mug, her mug, the white one, the one she'd left on the counter every morning for 8 weeks. "I know you do," she said. "You have the whole time." I noticed. "I didn't know I was doing anything," I said. "I know that too," she said. "That's Daniel. That's the whole thing, actually." I didn't fully understand what she meant. I thought I did, but I didn't. Not entirely, not yet. The complete version of it I'd get later, much later, after more had happened, after everything shifted the rest of the way it was going to shift. But sitting there at the kitchen table with the 2 mugs and the rain-cleared air coming through the window, I left cracked open because the heat runs high. I understood enough. She was telling me that the help I'd given her wasn't the roof over her head. It was something smaller and harder to name. It was the quality of the air in a space where someone doesn't have to perform being okay. I'd been given that too. I just hadn't known I needed it until it was already happening. The hardwood came in on a Thursday in mid-December. 2 boxes, rough-cut white oak, a tighter grain than what I had stockpiled, the right direction for the problem section near the window. I'd ordered a specific mill cut because the living room boards from 1943 had a particular character, narrow face, tight ring pattern, the kind of wood that came from old-growth trees that don't exist in commercial quantities anymore, and the replacement needed to match it well enough that you'd have to know what to look for before you saw the competitist difference. Nora was in her room when the delivery came. She heard the boxes and came out to look, crouching down to examine the face of one board with the same focused attention she'd given the before photographs in the hallway. "These are good," she said. "How do you know?" She ran her thumb along the grain. "I grew up in a house with old floors. My dad used to point out which boards were original. I learned what to look for." I hadn't known that. There were things I hadn't known. Still, after 8 weeks of shared mornings and evenings, and the particular knowledge you accumulate about a person when you live in the same space, but there were still rooms I hadn't been in. This seemed important in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. We started on Saturday morning. The section near the window was 11 square feet, irregular, shaped by the original bay projection. I'd already pulled the damaged boards the previous weekend. They'd gone soft at the edges, moisture damage from a window seal that had failed years before I bought the house and had been allowing slow infiltration ever since. The joists underneath were clean. The subfloor was solid. It was, as I'd told her months ago about the second bedroom, a surface problem. The structure was fine. She had good instincts for the work. She didn't try to do things she hadn't done before without asking first. She asked, specifically, concisely, once, and then she did the thing. She held the boards while I cut, kept the workspace organized without being asked, cleaned sawdust away from the fit line between cuts so I could see what I was doing. We didn't talk much while we were working. The rhythm of it was enough. At noon, we ate lunch on the floor of the living room, seated on the drop cloth with the half-finished section in front of us. Cold sandwiches, the good mustard she'd bought 2 weeks ago and that had quietly become a fixture in the refrigerator. She looked at the new boards, 3 courses laid, their lighter color against the darker surrounding original. "They'll darken," I said, "with time and light. In a few years you won't be able to tell. But right now you can," she said. "Right now you can." "Yes." She looked at it a moment longer. I think I like that, she said. That there's a record of the repair. Even if it fades eventually. I thought about that for a while after she said it. Cassandra called on a Sunday. Not to me. To Nora, in the other room, while I was fitting the last course of boards near the baseboard. I could hear Nora's side of it, the short answers, the silence that meant she was listening, the tone that went careful in the way it did when she was managing what she gave away. And then something changed. I heard Nora say, "What do you mean she called you?" I stopped what I was doing. A pause. Then Nora said, "When did she call you, Cass?" Not a question. Another pause. Longer. "Okay," Nora said. "Okay. I'll call you back." She came to the living room doorway. I was on the floor next to the baseboard, the rubber mallet in my hand, and I looked up and I could see from the set of her face that something had just reorganized. "What happened?" I said. She sat on the arm of the couch. She was doing the thing she did when she was recalculating. Her hands were still. Her face was still. But her eyes were moving slightly, like she was reading something. "Marcus called my mother," she said, 2 weeks ago. He told her I'd been staying somewhere, he didn't know where exactly, but he'd seen my car near this neighborhood. He told her he framed it. He said he was worried. He said he thought I was in a situation. She paused. "My mother called Cass this morning, to tell her." I set down the mallet. "She already knew you were here," I said. "Yes. So what did your mother?" "My mother framed it," Nora said. "The same way Marcus framed it to the organization. She called Cass to say she was worried. She used specific language. She said I was staying with a man Cassandra used to be married to, and she wanted to know if Cass thought that was healthy." The room was quiet. Outside, a car went past on the wet street. "That's the play," Nora said. She knew Cass already knew. She wanted to add the frame. She wanted Cass to be the one who intervened. She looked at the floor. "She's been doing this my whole life. She doesn't fight directly. She finds the person adjacent to the fight and hands them a reason." I thought about what Nora had told me about Marcus, the employer call, the framing, the incidents described from an angle. I thought about where Nora had learned to read that particular architecture. I thought about it and I understood something I should have seen the shape of earlier. "Did it work?" I said. "On Cass." Nora shook her head. "Cass told her she already knew where I was and that I was fine. She told her that Daniel was a good person and that she trusted his judgment." She paused, and then she called me to tell me what our mother had done. I let that settle. "That's not what I expected from Cass," I said honestly. "No," Nora said. "Me neither." She looked up. I think Cass has been doing some work. About our mother. About some things. It takes time." Something moved across her face. "She said to tell you she was sorry she hadn't said it sooner. That you were a good person." I didn't know what to do with that. I picked up the mallet. "There's one course left," I said. "I know," she said. She came off the arm of the couch and sat on the floor beside me. "I'll hand you the boards." We finished the floor. Marcus called my cell phone on a Tuesday. I don't know how he got my number. Probably the same way he'd located my neighborhood through the specific kind of attention that looks like concern and is actually surveillance. He'd found the connection between me and Cassandra, and from there the rest wasn't hard. He called at 7:15 in the morning. I was at the kitchen counter with my coffee, the cracked mug, looking at nothing in particular. "Mr. Marsh," he said. He had a good voice, warm, measured, the kind that carries authority by calibration. I'd never met him in person. He sounded like someone who'd practiced sounding reasonable. "I apologize for the early call. I'm trying to reach Nora. I think she's been staying with you." "What do you need?" I said. "I'm worried about her." He said it simply, like a man stating a fact. "She's been through a difficult time and I don't think she's getting the kind of support she has support," I said. A brief pause, just long enough to tell me he'd expected pushback and had an answer prepared. "I'm sure she does," he said. I only want to make sure she's stable. She has a history of she sometimes doesn't assess situations accurately when she's under stress. She can become attached to people who aren't necessarily equipped. I'm going to stop you there, I said. I'm not trying to. I heard what you're trying to do, I said. I heard the frame. It's the same frame you used with her employer. Silence, Nora told me, I said, specifically, in detail. And I believed her specifically and in detail, because the people who lie to cover themselves don't usually include the details that make them look bad. More silence. The quality of it had changed. She's safe, I said. She's not in an unstable situation. She's not attached to someone unequipped. If you're actually concerned about her welfare the way you sound concerned about it, then the best thing you can do is not call this number again. I waited. Mr. Marsh, he said. His voice had shifted, still controlled, but the warmth had dropped out, and what was underneath was something harder and less considered. You don't know the full history. No, I said, but I know enough about load distribution to tell you that a man who moves shared savings into a private account 6 weeks before ending a relationship is not calling because he's worried about someone else's well-being. A pause. Have a good morning, I said. And I ended the call. I stood in the kitchen and I was aware that my hands were steady and my voice had been steady and the steadiness was not performed. I had calculated the forces. I had checked the structure. I had said the true thing in the most efficient way. This is what I know how to do. What I hadn't known, until that morning, was that I could do it for someone else as naturally as I did it for a bridge. Nora came in at 7:40. She looked at me. Your face is doing something, she said. Marcus called, I said. She went still. When? 20 minutes ago. What did he? It's handled, I said. He used the frame. I named it. He doesn't have anywhere to go from here. She stared at me. You're sure? I'm sure, I said. People like that rely on the person across from them not having the vocabulary for what they're doing. I have the vocabulary. She sat down at the table. She put her hands flat on the surface, the same way she'd done the night she told me about the studio. She was checking whether the surface was solid. He's going to try again, she said. Not with you. Through another angle. Maybe, I said. But the angles are closing. Your mother's play didn't land. His frame didn't land. Each time it doesn't land, it costs him credibility with the people he might try next. She looked at her hands on the table. Then she looked up at me. You knew about structural failure, she said. How things fall apart. Yes. But you also know how things hold, she said. That's not the same knowledge. That's the other side of it. I thought about that. I thought about the Morrison Bridge seismic retrofit, how the work isn't only about understanding how a structure fails under load, but about understanding what needs to be there for it not to. The redundancies, the members that share the weight so no single point carries more than it was designed to carry. Yes, I said. It is the other side of it. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she got up and poured herself coffee and stood at the counter with me, looking out the window at Vince's yard, and neither of us needed to say anything further. She moved to the studio in January, the second week of it, on a Saturday with dry, cold air and a pale winter sun that made the neighborhood look scraped clean. I helped her move. There wasn't much. She'd moved light, lived light, accumulated carefully. 3 trips in my truck. When the last box was in and the studio was full of her things in temporary configurations that would settle into something permanent over weeks, she stood in the middle of the room and looked around with the expression of someone checking a structure. It's solid, I said. The building? The building, I said. And the rest of it, she turned to look at me. I'm going to be fine, she said. I know you are, I said. I knew that in week 2. Then, why did you let me stay 8 weeks? I thought about the cracked mug, about the tomato frames standing empty in Vince's yard, about all the surface things I'd been fixing while leaving the internal systems unaddressed. I needed it too, I said. She held that. I watched her hold it, watched her check it the way she'd checked the surface of the new hardwood floor, not for flaws, but for honesty, for whether it was what it appeared to be. "Okay," she said. She crossed the room. She hugged me. A real hug, the kind with duration and intention. I put my arms around her and I felt the weight of 8 weeks settle into something it was going to take me longer to name. She stepped back. "Come for dinner Thursday," she said. "I'm going to cook something actual, with the real kitchen, not your half-done one." "My kitchen is finished," I said. "Come for dinner Thursday," she said again, and something in her voice had a door in it that she'd left open. "Yes," I said. "Okay." I drove home through the pale January streets with the truck empty and the heater running, and I thought about the living room floor, about the section near the window where the new boards sat in their tighter grain, a shade lighter than the surrounding century-old wood. They would darken with time, with foot traffic and light and the slow passage of seasons. In a few years, you'd have to know what to look for before you saw the seam, but right now the difference was there, a record of the repair. Evidence that something had been missing and was now present. Evidence that the work had been done. A structure doesn't know it's been strengthened. The math just changes. The load distributes differently. The redundancies multiply. The failure threshold rises. The building doesn't feel it, but the building holds. I know that now. I know it differently than I did in November, when I stood in a doorway and looked at a woman in a damp coat on the right side of my bed and thought, I need to call the police. Looking back, I know exactly what was happening. She was at the end of a structure she'd been maintaining alone for too long. We just hadn't had the vocabulary to say it yet. I got home. I made coffee in the cracked mug, which I hadn't replaced because I'd stopped pretending that keeping it was an oversight. I sat at the kitchen table. The other mug, the white one, the one with the handle that curved slightly narrower, was in the cabinet where I'd put it when I washed up after her last morning. I'd put it with the others in the set, and I'd taken it back out and put it on the counter the next day without deciding to. The way you do things that are true before they're named. I left it there. Some people find their way to the door you've left unlocked. Not by accident. Not because they had nowhere else to go, but because something in them already knew where the structure was solid, before they had the language for it. The hardwood floor is finished. The kitchen is finished. There's a section of the porch railing I've been putting off. The wood is soft in 2 places, needs to come out entirely and be replaced, and I'll get to it in the spring. There are things in this house that still need work. There are things in me that still need work. The difference is that I'm no longer pretending either of those facts is fine. Thursday is 4 days away. Sometimes the thing that holds you isn't the grand intervention. It's a key on a thin silver ring, a mug left in a consistent place, a drawer fixed without announcement, a floor laid in shared silence on a Saturday in December. Have you ever fixed something for someone without telling them you noticed it was broken or had someone do that for you? The quiet thing that said, I see this, without making you defend it. Drop that in the comments. I read every one. If this story landed somewhere real for you, leave a like. It helps more than you know. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe and hit the bell.